The movie begins with a book opening, telling the story of a happy kingdom ruled by a kind and generous king and queen. They had everything, except a child, which they prayed for constantly. Then, on a beautiful winter night, their wish came true. A beautiful baby girl was born, and they named her Snow White. As Snow White grew up, the king and queen taught her that although they ruled the kingdom, it truly belonged to the people they served. They told her that one day she would have to take responsibility for it, and they trusted that she would lead with honesty and kindness. Everything was going well until, one day, the queen fell ill and passed away, leaving the king and Snow White alone and heartbroken. Time passed, and one day a stunningly beautiful woman arrived in the kingdom. The king was enchanted by her beauty and soon married her. She became the new queen, but her beauty meant more to her than the king or the kingdom. She owned a magical mirror that only spoke the truth. The evil queen would often ask it, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" As long as the mirror replied that she was, she felt immense joy. One day, through the mirror, she found out that the kingdom was about to be attacked. The king left with his army to fight the war, but never returned. With his disappearance, the evil queen seized complete control and her tyranny grew. Snow White, once a princess, was now treated as a servant in the castle. Years passed, and people forgot that the kingdom even had a princess. Due to the queen's cruelty, the kingdom descended into darkness and famine spread. One day, while Snow White was cleaning the castle, a boy named Jonathan sneaked in to steal supplies. Snow White caught him and told him stealing was wrong and that he could ask the queen for food. She encouraged him to speak to the queen or the princess about their troubles. Jonathan laughed and asked, "What princess? I doubt she's even alive." Hearing this broke Snow White's heart. She replied softly, "The princess is still alive, and she wants to help her people." Jonathan brushed her off, saying, "Well, she hasn't done anything yet," and walked off with some potatoes. His words stayed with Snow White. She began thinking that maybe she should indeed do something to help her people. She went to the queen and told her, "You should care for the people and share your wealth to ease their suffering. My father taught me to be kind. Every year, we used to bake apple pies and distribute them among the people." The queen scoffed and said, "These filthy worms don't deserve such luxurious food." Just then, her guards brought in Jonathan, caught for stealing. As punishment, the queen ordered his home to be burned down. But Jonathan replied, "I don't even have a home." It turns out he was the leader of a group of outlaws who once worked for the king. Hearing this, the queen ordered the guards to throw him into the dungeon so violently that his screams echoed through the palace. Snow White objected, saying, "My father never believed in punishment just for fear. He always gave people a chance." Her words only angered the queen further. She ordered Jonathan to be stripped and left standing in the freezing cold outside the castle. The queen then insulted Snow White and made her feel worthless. Heartbroken, Snow White sang a song remembering her parents and wishing for better times for her people. She then secretly went to Jonathan and freed him, urging him to escape before the guards caught him again. Meanwhile, the queen returned to her magical mirror and asked it again, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" But this time, the mirror replied, "You are no longer the fairest. Someone else has surpassed you, Snow White." Enraged and jealous, the queen summoned her most loyal hitman and ordered him to kill Snow White and bring back her heart in a box. The hitman didn't want to do it. He saw innocence in Snow White. But the queen insisted, accusing Snow White of secretly working with outlaws and leaking information to enemy kingdoms. At that moment, Snow White had gone into the forest to pick apples. The hitman followed her but couldn't bring himself to kill her. Instead, he told her the queen's real intentions, that she wanted Snow White dead. He also hinted that the queen was hiding something about Snow White's father. Shocked and afraid, Snow White fled deep into the forest. The path was treacherous. She encountered strange creatures and terrifying beasts. Eventually, she came across a monstrous tree that tried to trap her with its roots. Just as it was about to harm her, the ground beneath her opened up, and she fell into another world, one unlike anything she had ever seen. This world was beautiful, and its small animals seemed kind. They took her to a tiny house nestled in the woods. Everything inside was small, 7 tiny beds included. Exhausted, Snow White fell asleep across all 7 beds. The animals gently covered her with a blanket. Meanwhile, the 7 dwarfs, who worked in diamond mines, were heading home after a long day. When they arrived, they were shocked to find a human girl in their house. Most of them panicked and ran around in fear, except one small dwarf who stood still. Before he could also run, Snow White gently approached and introduced herself. Before she could say more, the rest of the dwarfs returned with weapons, thinking she was a threat. Snow White assumed they didn't want her there and decided to leave. The dwarfs, in reality, were just shocked to see a human for the first time. Before leaving, Snow White wondered where else she could possibly go. She then decided to stay and tell the dwarf. She says, "My name is Snow White. The evil queen wanted to have me killed, so I ran into the forest and ended up here." Hearing her story, all the dwarfs feel really bad, and they now start introducing themselves as well. One by one, They tell Snow White their names and explain that they work in the diamond mines. Looking at them, Snow White says, "Now I understand why my dad always used to say that the forest is a magical place. Maybe it's because of places like this." Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the evil queen. Through her magical mirror, she learns that Snow White is still alive. As soon as she opens the jewelry box given to her by the hitman and finds an apple inside, she becomes furious at his betrayal. In a strange tone, she says, "No one who deceives me will be spared." Instead of her soldiers, she had summoned the hitman directly. She brutally kills the hitman. The hitman knew this was coming and had accepted his death. But before dying, he tells the evil queen, "If there's even a drop of mercy in your heart, please spare Snow White." The queen ignores his words, orders his body to be thrown into the ravine, and commands her soldiers to find Snow White in the forest. Back in the forest, we see Snow White with the dwarfs. This morning was different from all others. The dwarfs, as usual, were tumbling and fighting among themselves and picking on the smallest one. The little dwarf, saddened, walks out, and Snow White notices this. She kindly explains to him, "Being sad won't solve anything. We must face every problem with courage." She even teaches him how to play the flute, and within a short time, his mood lifts. When they return to the house, they find everything broken and messy. The dwarfs begin fighting over who should clean up. Snow White says, "All these chores you see as burdens can actually be fun if we all do them together." She also realizes that their anger isn't because they hate each other. It's just that they don't know how to express themselves properly. Snow White teaches them how communication can solve many problems. This brings a major change to their lives. They begin to sing, work, and live happily together. Snow White also shares stories from her childhood, how her kingdom used to be full of love when both her mother and father were alive. While talking, she remembers the hitman had hinted that the queen had hidden some truth about her father. They all believed the king had died in battle, but maybe he was still alive. Snow White tells the dwarfs, "We might be able to find him. The bandits in the forest once said they used to work for the king." Now it was time for the dwarfs to head off to work, so they left, and Snow White went into the forest in search of the bandits. While wandering, someone suddenly pulls her behind a tree. It's Jonathan, who saved her from the soldiers the queen had sent. Snow White tells Jonathan, "I think my dad, the king, might still be alive." Jonathan replies, "That's possible. I've heard rumors that the kingdom he went to fight against captured him, but I don't know exactly where." As they're talking, Jonathan's companions arrive. They greet Snow White with great respect. Before they can form a proper plan to find the king, several soldiers appear. They had seen Snow White. Without hesitation, Jonathan and his group decide to protect her. They stand in front, ready to fight the royal soldiers, and tell Snow White to run. But there were far too many soldiers, and the bandits were few. Snow White begins to worry about them too. That's when an idea strikes her. She sneaks over and unties all the soldiers' horses, creating chaos and buying the bandits time to escape. Then she climbs a tall cliff and yells, drawing all the soldiers' attention. When the soldiers reach the top of the cliff, they find only a piece of cloth. Snow White is no longer there. She had already reunited with the bandits. Together, they escape deep into the forest and finally shake off the soldiers. Jonathan praises Snow White for her bravery and tells her, "We have always been loyal to the king. Under his rule, we lived comfortably." As they were talking in their hideout, a soldier suddenly appears, sees Snow White, and points an arrow at her. Before he could shoot, Jonathan notices him, pushes Snow White aside, and takes the arrow himself. Jonathan's companions capture the soldier, and Snow White decides to take Jonathan to the dwarfs, hoping one of them might be able to help. Among the dwarfs, there was one named Document. She hoped he might be a doctor, but when they reach the dwarf's house, they discover that Doc isn't a doctor. His name is just Document. His specialty is extracting rocks and minerals. Hearing this, one of Jonathan's companions becomes angry and an argument breaks out. Snow White stops them and says, "What are you doing? This is exactly what the evil queen wants, for us to separate, to not trust anyone but ourselves. But that's not right. Only by helping each other can we succeed." Hearing her speech, silence falls for a while. Then Doc speaks up and says, "I may not be a doctor, but I'll do whatever I can to save Jonathan." Doc takes Jonathan inside. After a long time, when he comes out, there's sadness on his face. Everyone looks at him with questioning eyes. But before he can speak, Jonathan walks out alive, though very weak. Seeing him, everyone rejoices. In their joy, they begin to celebrate. Singing and dancing, Snow White and Jonathan grow very close to each other. Just before they were about to kiss, they realized that they were standing among many people. It was almost morning now. Jonathan and his companions decided that as soon as morning broke, they would head into the forest so that this secret place could remain hidden and Snow White could stay safe there. Before leaving, Jonathan told her, "I'm going away for 2 days. I won't be able to return before that. But I promise, when I return, we will go to the Sworden Kingdom to find the king." At that moment, Snow White gave him her locket, which had been gifted to her by her father. She said, "This will remind you to come back." As he journeyed into the jungle, Jonathan got caught in a trap. Before he could even understand what had happened, the evil queen's soldiers captured him and brought him to the palace. There, the queen began questioning him about Snow White. Jonathan tried his best to act convincingly and said he didn't even know Snow White. But the locket around his neck gave away the truth. After pulling the chain off his neck, the queen had Jonathan thrown into the dungeon. Then, she began working on some magical potions. Here, the truth about the evil queen was revealed. She was actually a witch. She drank the potion and immediately began to transform, turning into an old, hideous witch. This was her true form. Her beauty had only been an illusion created by magic. She then took an apple and cast some poison apple spells on it. In simple terms, she cast a spell that would put Snow White into a deep sleep upon taking a bite. Meanwhile, Jonathan was shown trying to escape from the dungeon, where he also encountered the huntsman. The scene cut to Snow White, who was alone after the dwarfs had left for their daily work. She too wanted to go search for her father. But just then, an old lady appeared. Snow White didn't recognize her. The old woman, who was actually the witch, gave Snow White her own locket and said that Jonathan was in grave danger. Seeing her locket, Snow White immediately understood she had to rescue Jonathan. As she was about to leave, the witch stopped her and handed her an apple, saying, "Eat this. It will keep your energy up. After all, your father used to say that love can conquer any difficulty." Hearing these emotional words from her father, Snow White fell into the witch's trap and ate the apple. At the same time, all the birds and animals around rushed to inform the dwarfs that Snow White was in danger. As soon as Snow White bit into the apple, everything went dark before her eyes. She started feeling dizzy and asked, "What was in this?" At that moment, the witch repeated the same words the evil queen used to say. That's when Snow White realized the truth, that this was the evil queen in disguise, who always saw her as an enemy. Snow White then fell into a deep sleep. Dark clouds spread across the entire kingdom, and the evil witch vanished into smoke. When the dwarfs and animals arrived and saw Snow White lying still, they were heartbroken. They thought she was dead. They could do nothing but lay her in a special place and cover her with flowers. Back in the dungeon, the huntsman and Jonathan broke down a wall that led to a waterway flowing into the forest. The huntsman handed Jonathan a dagger, and Jonathan rushed through the jungle. On the way, he met some animals whose panic made him realize something terrible had happened. As he reached the dwarf's home and saw Snow White lying still, he was overwhelmed with grief. Overcome with emotion, he sat by her side and kissed her. The moment Jonathan kissed her, Snow White woke up. A wave of joy spread through everyone. Once conscious, she told Jonathan the truth, that everything was happening because of the evil queen, who was actually a witch. It was she who had conspired to send their father to war, and then had him killed by her own people. As they were talking, a snowflake landed on Snow White's hand. Seeing it, Snow White decided it was time for her to take charge. She had to fight the evil queen and save her kingdom. Her people deserved a queen who would love them and improve their lives. As soon as Snow White returned to the kingdom, hope rekindled in the hearts of the people. Everyone followed her to the palace gates. Upon seeing the people and Snow White together, the evil queen came down herself. In one hand, she held a sword, and in the other, a beautiful rose. She said, "Only beauty and power are worthy of the throne." Then, she blew on the rose and set it on fire, saying, "Now only power remains to rule the throne." She tried provoking Snow White to fight, but instead of fighting, Snow White began reminding the queen's soldiers of their compassionate past, when, during the reign of the king, they used to be kind-hearted. Everyone cared for one another, and life was better for all. Snow White said, "It wasn't too long ago when this kingdom was at peace, when people were happy and received justice. I just want to bring that back." Hearing this, the queen's soldiers dropped their weapons, showing that they now stood with Snow White. Seeing her powers slipping away, the queen attacked Snow White. But just in time, someone shot an arrow that knocked the dagger from her hand. It turned out to be a dwarf who had saved Snow White's life. Soon, all the dwarfs arrived, ready to support Snow White and the people. The queen, in a fit of rage, ran inside the palace to her magical mirror. The mirror had seen everything. The queen summoned the mirror one last time and asked, "Tell me, mirror, who is the most beautiful in the world?" The mirror replied, "The most beautiful in this world is Snow White, and she always will be. Her beauty doesn't lie in appearances, but in her heart. She will rule people's hearts because of her justice and compassion. Your beauty never reached within you. Your outward appearance means nothing." Infuriated, the queen threw something and shattered the mirror. It broke into 1,000 pieces, and the queen's body began to swirl and turn black. She transformed into smoke and was sucked into the broken shards of the mirror. The queen was now trapped inside it forever. We also learned that all of her powers had actually come from that magical mirror. With the end of the evil queen, Snow White took her rightful place on the throne. Happiness returned to the kingdom with her arrival, and with that, this beautiful story came to an end.